Our top story this hour, 6 states head to the polls tomorrow to cast votes in some of the most important primary contests of 2014. Elections for House and Senate candidates in states like Georgia and Kentucky will not only help determine which party will control the U.S. Senate next year, they will also serve as a test concerning the GOP's future and that of the Tea Party. Joining us now on the right, Republican strategist Phillip Stutts. This is metaphorically speaking, may not show up this way on your screen. From the political right, it's Phillip Stutts. From the political left, Democrat consultant Bridget Todd. Phillip and Bridget, we thank you both for taking time to be with us today on America's Forum.
My pleasure.
We have it actually done up where you're on the same side of the screen. Phillip's on top, Bridget's right there on the bottom. And Bridget, I know you don't want that to be a metaphor for what may happen to control of the U.S. Senate, but we'll stick with it today. Let me start with Phillip. A crowded 7-way primary in Georgia. Do you think someone can win the Republican nomination outright tomorrow?
Oh, I don't know. It's going to definitely go to a runoff. I mean, David Perdue is winning right now. Jack Kingston's in second. Some of the Tea Party candidates are below that. And the key here has been money, money, and more money. Third-party groups have come in. And so I definitely see this going to a runoff tomorrow, Congressman.
Okay, so a runoff on the Republican side. Bridget, let's take a look at the Democratic side. Now, I know there is technically a primary, but the popular wisdom is that Michelle Nunn is going to have no problem coasting to victory tomorrow in the Democrat primary. And you hear that name, and it's a familiar name, obviously. She's the daughter of the former Georgia Democratic Senator Sam Nunn. So what role does the family's last name play in this Georgia Senate election?
You know, I think you're right. I think that Nunn is really poised to sort of win this without any real problems. I think her name definitely has some pull. It's a familiar name, comes from a real familiar family. I think you're right. I also think that she has kind of run very moderate, sort of talking in sort of generalities about things we can all agree with, just sort of common sense policy points, and I think that'll really help her in this election.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what transpires there, Bridget, and it's interesting. We go from that state in the Deep South to a border state, the bluegrass state of Kentucky. And in Kentucky tomorrow on the Republican side, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell takes on primary opponent Matt Bevin. Matt Bevin supported by some Tea Party groups, although Mitch McConnell reached out to other Tea Party groups, and you've seen not a consensus around Bevin. Phillip, any chance for Matt Bevin to pull a surprise tomorrow against Mitch McConnell?
0.00. All the polls have come in, and McConnell is well above 50%, almost to 55%. I think the real thing to watch here, JD, is does Bevin hurt McConnell enough where Allison Lundgren can come in the general election, she's the Democrat nominee, and win the race. But right now, Bevin has absolutely no chance whatsoever.
Now, it's very interesting the way you put that, Phillip. 0.00% chance for Bevin. Interesting empirical data there.
Data is in the polling, which is Bevin's down almost 30 points in the polling I've seen, and that's been consistent all along. I just don't see how he gets over the top here.
Well, if I can let you in on a little secret, having been in that situation, being outspent 10-1 in Arizona Republican primary back in 2010, the day before the election, when I was doing the interviews, I said, we are poised to pull a historic upset. Now, you'll note the way we were poised to pull it. Had we pulled it off, it would have been a historic upset, but you're telling me that Matt Bevin may meet the same fate that I met against John McCain back in 2010. It all inures to the best. I'm happy to be on television, but just a little bit of political terminology and inside baseball for an underdog candidate. Let me turn now, Bridget, to the Democratic side, and it's almost like variations on a theme, what we're seeing down in Georgia. A contest on the Republican side against an incumbent and a grassroots activist, but there sits Allison Lundgren Grimes as the Democratic nominee for Kentucky. Does this this intra-party warfare for the Republicans bode well for Ms. Grimes in her race to win the seat?
Well, gee, I hope so. I think that if it comes down to McConnell and Grimes, which it seems pretty likely that it will, I think it'll be a really interesting race. If it came down to Bevin and Grimes, I think, she would have no issues sort of winning that pretty handily. But I don't think it'll play that way.
So you're feeling pretty good about Georgia and Kentucky as a Democratic strategist?
I think so. I think it really comes down to whether the voters are going to sort of go with the GOP establishment or sort of stick with the sort of Tea Party leaders. I think we're seeing, if I think that these Tea Party politicians wouldn't be terribly hard to defeat. I think it comes down to sort of the voters and who they're going to go with. If they go with these Tea Party folks, I'll be happy because I think it'll be a lot easier to sort of win against them. But I think a McConnell-Grimes race would be a lot more difficult to call.
All right, you hear that, Philip. And McConnell, in terms of the support he's getting, seems like he is spoiling for this fight following the primary tomorrow. Let's look ahead to the general. I know it's always dangerous in this business, Philip, but McConnell mounting a comeback because this polling early on did not look so good for him moving into a general election against the Democratic candidate.
I think in the end, JD, the best thing that ever happened to Mitch McConnell was Matt Bevin. It forced him to go out, spend money to find the race, put hard-earned money and hard-earned work behind the race. I think that has him pretty prepared to go against Ms. Grimes. And I actually see that in this political environment, the polling we're seeing across the country, she may be competitive now. I don't see how any Democrat on a statewide level in a competitive race gets over the top this election cycle. It's going to be really hard. I mean, the numbers with Obamacare and every other issue out there right now with the president dragging down the Democrats is just crushing any competitive race, especially in these Senate races across the country.
Well, my partner alongside, as a Georgian, has more than a casual interest in what transpires tomorrow. John Bachman?
Yeah, Philip, this question's for you, and it's about the Georgia race and the Republican primary right now. David Perdue is the guy who's leading by a pretty wide margin according to most polling, but are those numbers going to change dramatically if we do go to a runoff here? Because we're already seeing some of the outside groups like FreedomWorks cast Perdue as a moderate. Does this set up Jack Kingston, the Republican, to kind of be the recipient if he emerges as a runoff opponent for Perdue to be the recipient of some of the Tea Party and grassroots support in that race?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, the problem is they say Kingston's is moderate as well. And so, listen, the Chamber of Commerce is no fan of the Tea Party right now, and they're all in with Kingston. The one thing about Perdue is he's got his own money. He does have some third-party groups out of South Carolina that have put $1 million into the race for him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. I tend to give the lean towards Perdue right now.
Well, let's, Bridget, you want to make a comment on the Georgia Republicans? Any more you want to say on that race?
No, I mean, I more or less agree. I think that it's an interesting race. I was sort of interested and sort of pleasantly surprised to see the Tea Party folks sort of fall to the bottom of the bottom of the race. I guess that is sort of indicative of sort of how folks are feeling about the Tea Party and sort of their chances of getting a real candidate through.
Oh, can I jump in here, guys?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Philip.
I would disagree with that respectfully, because here's the deal. 4 years ago, the Tea Party caught everybody off guard. And yeah, there were some bad candidates that were thrown into that group, but there were some great candidates that came out of there as well. And so what mainstream Republicans did and what the Chamber of Commerce did is they said, we're going to be prepared this time. They have put millions of dollars in races all over the country to stop these Tea Party candidates. These Tea Party candidates have not been able to raise the kind of money they need to be competitive, and that's what we're seeing right now. If they had equal money, it'd be more equal in the polls.
So there's no money, there's a lot of passion. I always said grassroots and greenbacks are required, but Philip, you mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. Does that just mean that the fix is in for amnesty in the next Congress?
You've got some pretty good members in Congress right now that are going to hold the line on this. It's pretty close, and this election will determine a lot. And like I said, the United States Chamber of Commerce is putting $35 million into the midterms, especially going after Tea Party candidates to try to stop that. So it's a great question, JD. We'll see how the elections play out.
Yeah, I've got my suspicions as a border hawk, just what the U.S. Chamber is up to. At any rate, let's move to the House of Representatives. A new poll by Politico shows Republicans in the lead in the most competitive House and Senate races for the 2014 midterms. 41% of respondents say they would choose a Republican, compared to 34% saying they would choose a Democrat. 48% also saying they want to repeal Obamacare entirely. Bridget, taking a look at those numbers, I know it's a snapshot fixed in time, but it looks like an uphill battle for the Democrats.
You know, I'm so glad that you said it's a snapshot fixed in time, because that's exactly how I see it. I think overall, folks are pretty happy with Obamacare. I think that, you know, I think that when you come down to sort of how folks are really feeling about it, they like having health care. They like not being able to be kicked off their insurance by their providers. I think they like these things. I think that the numbers perhaps don't paint an accurate portrait of how folks are actually feeling about it when you ask them.
Philip, I would imagine you have a significantly different take on this than does Bridget.
Well, again, I appreciate Bridget's perspective. It's, you know, listen, Republicans were in this spot back in 2006. We were in this spot in 2008. I remember trying to put lipstick on a pig back then, too. Listen, I've seen the polls. I don't care if it's in moderate states, conservative states, and even in some liberal states like Oregon, where we have a Senate candidate that is poised to be competitive. In Michigan, where we have a Senate candidate poised to be competitive. This is the anchor that is weighing down the Democrats. People don't like it.
All right, that'll be the last word. Philip, we thank you. Bridget, as always, we thank you for your insights, and we'll see what happens in those primary elections around the country tomorrow. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
So what about it, Johnny B?
Well, I know also coming up soon there's going to be a lot more money. American Crossroads just announced a $10 million ad buy in places like North Carolina. We're talking about money. We're going to see a lot more commercials on TV, and that's also going to move those poll numbers. So it's going to get interesting, JD. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned here, because we'll have more following this time out.